tell me a little bit about this particular study.
We have done a couple of studies looking at learning and memory in monolingual children and bilingual children, and we're really interested in how flexible children's memories are. So it turns out that they are really quite specific in their memories at first. They notice changes. They're very, very good at noticing differences in colours and shapes. So we wanted to know when they would become more flexible and be able to notice that something works even if it's slightly different in colour and shape. So what we found with monolinguals is that by the time they were about 18 months, they could deal with some changes, but they were pretty small changes. And then as soon as we made it a little bit harder, they suddenly wouldn't be flexible anymore. So we wondered what bilingual babies would do, given that bilingual babies have so much, given that bilinguals have to focus on lots of different words that work in the same way. So one word in one language works the same way as a different word in another language. We wondered if this would actually help them figure out how objects worked as well. And so what we did is we did the same thing with the bilinguals as the monolinguals. We showed them one object, and then we gave them a slightly different object that was a different shape and colour. And we found that the monolinguals could not tell that the different object worked in the same way, but the bilinguals could. They were more flexible and they could understand that one object would work in the same way as the other.
Tell me what you and your colleagues were looking at in this particular research study.
In this particular study, we were interested in how flexible babies' memories would be. So these were 18-month-old babies, and we wondered if they could remember. I'm just going to start that one more time again because I'm just trying to think about how to. We were really interested in how flexible babies' memories might be. So what we did is we took 18-month-old babies and we showed them an object, and then we brought back one that was slightly different. It had slightly different shape and colour. And then we saw, could they notice that it would work in the same way? And what we found is that monolinguals found this very hard, and they couldn't notice that the two objects would work in the same way. So we wondered what might happen with bilinguals. Bilinguals have to deal with words working in different ways all the time. One word in one language, another word works the same in a different language. We wondered if it would be the same with objects as well. And we found that it was. So bilinguals were given one object, then a slightly different one that had a different colour and shape, and they figured out how it worked. They were more flexible earlier than the monolinguals were. A few months later, monolinguals also figured out this difference and were flexible as well. It's just that the bilinguals seem to be a bit faster in this particular game. When we asked them if just to do with the same objects, were their absolute memories any different, they did just the same as one another when the objects didn't differ. So when the objects were the same, monolinguals and bilinguals remembered the same amount.
What does this suggest?
This suggests that the world that you're growing up in is actually influencing how you're seeing the world. So this language that's surrounding you is influencing the way that you're understanding how objects work in the world as well. So the monolinguals are surrounded by one word matching one object, so they're figuring out how objects work one at a time, but the bilinguals are figuring out that different words match onto the same object and that different objects might work in the same way as well. So it just turns out that having this different language environment allows you to treat information slightly differently.
Is there a benefit that continues as children get older?
There do happen to be differences that continue through the preschool years. And we haven't looked at this yet. We've got an ongoing study. We want to see if memory flexibility continues into the preschool years as other groups have found. So other groups have found that not only memory is more flexible, but also some ability to switch and transition between tasks and to understand, be more flexible in their thinking continues in the preschool years.
What are the benefits of having this memory flexibility?
Eventually, all children are going to have this memory flexibility. And so what we're seeing is sort of like a difference in their timing. But if we think about particularly for children who might be going into preschool, it might be really beneficial to be flexible. So let's imagine you're sitting in a schoolroom and there are toys, and they differ slightly. So there's a group of red blocks, there's a group of blue blocks, there's a group of green blocks, and they're different shapes and sizes. If you're more flexible, you could start working on one set, the next day come back and be given a different set, and you can just pick up straight away because you can understand that these things work in similar ways. So this actually could be really helpful to you as you're moving into a new place which might have new objects and new things that you could learn that they work in similar ways more quickly.
For parents who speak only one language in the home, is this a concern? Are there children missing out on an educational component?
The children who are growing up in monolingual homes are not missing out. I don't want that to be the takeaway. The takeaway is that this language is really, really helping babies. So whether it be one language or two languages, having a rich language experience is literally helping shape children's understanding of the world. So it's helping them understand how objects work, it's helping them understand how their world works. It helps them understand in one language, it helps them understand in two languages. That if they're lucky enough to grow up in a bilingual house, they will get that experience about their world from two different points of view. If they're growing up in a monolingual household, they can learn as much about the world as possible from their parents as well.
Some tips, Rachel, for parents for providing this rich language experiences, as you mentioned it, whether you're monolingual or bilingual.
Whether you're providing one language or multiple languages to your child, if you can describe what is happening in your child's world, you're really helping them connect language with the world that they're growing up in. So for example, if a child is building a block, a tower of blocks, and they build one block, you say you're building one block, and now another block, and now another block. Oh no, it fell over. You're helping them connect the language in the world to what's actually happening in their world. And that really helps them understand the world that they're growing up in.
Do you have any other tips? Do you have one or two other suggestions for parents?
Perhaps helping them figure out some words that they might not know yet. So adding in some words that you already know that they don't know. So, oh, that's those blocks are colliding with one another. Those blocks are clanging with one another. So really sort of helping them understand these different words. And if you've got two languages, you can provide lots of different examples of these different words. If you've got one language, there's also lots of different examples of the same word that you can give a child. So giving them a wider, more flexible way to talk about the world.
Can you tell me some of the parameters of the study, how many children were involved, and the specifics of, you mentioned the object, what kind of an object, and exactly how did you go about doing this?
We've done this study now 4 times because we wanted to make sure that we had replicated it and that we replicated it and repeated the same finding in different ages. So we've done a study with 6-month-olds, 2 with 18-month-olds, and 1 with 24-month-olds. One of the studies we did in Spain as well as the United States, so that we could make sure that we could look at different types of bilinguals. And in each of these objects each of these studies, we used either puppets or games like a rattle or an animal. So the puppets differed in the colour and shape, and the rattles also differed in their colour and shape. A child would be shown something exciting like a mitten coming off the puppet, there's a bell inside, the bell goes back on again. This is very exciting if you're anywhere under 2 years of age. And then they would be shown a different animal that also has the same glove, and we would see whether or not they noticed that the same glove was on there and that they could remove it even though it was a different animal. With the rattle, what we had is it had a different colour lid, a different way that the lid attached, but basically the child would put a ball into a container, a lid on the container, then shake shake the stick and make the rattle work. So we could show them things that worked in the same way, but that looked different on the outside, to see how flexible they could be in their memory.
How many children were involved?
100 children per study, so approximate between 300 and 400 children so far have been involved in these studies.
And what are the implications for the findings?
So the implications for the findings are that beginning very early in life, the language that is surrounding you is really important. I think that's probably the biggest takeaway, that this is literally shaping the way that children are learning about the world.
You and I had mentioned the word advantage is kind of a misnomer, because there's not really an advantage. Is that the case?
There's not really an advantage here. What is happening is that children are growing up in different worlds, and they're being given different information, and they have to solve different problems given the information that they have. So if you have two languages, you have a different problem in the world to solve. You have to figure out how two words match onto one object. If you're growing up with one language, you have to figure out how one word matches onto different objects. So children have this problem of language, and then they have to solve it. All children have to solve this problem, especially by the time they get to preschool. We know that their language ability beginning in preschool is really critical in terms of long-term school performance. So if they can solve this language problem early on, then it's going to be really beneficial to them.
Is there anything I didn't ask you, Rachel, that you would want people to know?
In a couple of our studies, we had groups of trilingual children as well. And what we found at 18 months is that initially they looked more like, they were learning more like a monolingual baby, and by 24 months, they were in between the monolinguals and the bilinguals. So if you're growing up in a trilingual home, you have an even different problem. It's not the same problem as a bilingual or the same problem as a monolingual. You have another set of language cues that you have to learn about, another huge amount of information that you have to process, so that the trilinguals actually solve the problem in a different way as well.
Could you tell us why researchers found those differences between bilinguals and trilinguals?
The reason why the problem is different for trilinguals is that you're actually not getting as much information in each language in the same amount of time. So you essentially have 3 times as much information, but you may only be hearing one of the languages a short amount of time. You might be hearing one language from one parent, a different language from another parent, and then the language of your community is the third language. So this again is a very different problem to solve than if you're in a bilingual home where you might be learning one language from both parents and then the community language as your second language. So again, this is a really exciting area as we try to figure out, well, what is the implications of these early language environments. We need to figure out how it is that children are growing up, and they each have these different language worlds that they're growing up in, and we're now starting to understand a bit more about the different language worlds that children are growing up in.
When we see Olivia working with the baby, can you describe for me what she physically will be doing?
What will happen in our studies is that a researcher comes in and brings the toy. So she's going to bring out a rattle. She's going to show, she'll be showing the baby that the ball goes into the jar, the lid goes on the jar, and that she shakes the stick to make the rattle work. And then what she's going to do is take away that rattle that she's just built, and she's going to bring out a different set of objects. They're going to be a different shape, different color, and then she'll see, can the baby put together that rattle again. So there will be a jar, there will be a ball, there will be a stick, but they're going to be a different color and a different shape. So we see if they can put together that rattle even though the shape and color have changed.
What would you say to parents, what would you advise them if they've been told not to speak to their babies in their native language?
Very good point. So one of the really important implications of this study is that to make a rich language environment, it's really great to speak in the language that you know best. So if you speak in your own language, you're going to have all sorts of information that you can share with your child. And another person will be able to share all sorts of information from another language. So one of the really big implications is to share that language with your child, whatever it is that is, whatever language that you speak, that is your own language, to share that with your baby, because we know that that is really going to be the richest source of information for your baby.
Tell me a little bit about your background, where you get your undergraduate and your other degrees.
I did my training at Otago University in New Zealand, both my undergraduate degree in psychology and my clinical diploma in psychology and my PhD in psychology. And then I did some postdoctoral training here in the US at Rutgers University, and then I started my position here at Georgetown.